It could be. There's a lot of possibilities. He bragged about his naval. He didn't deny it. And as a matter of fact, like a lot of things, he may very well have exaggerated it. The official record on him is that, yes, he did a little training with naval intelligence and didn't do much with them. Now, I don't think they released official naval intelligence if it actually says, yes, we tasked him with starting a major cult.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not like they would admit it. But at the same time, just to say, that's what the official record is. He says he did all kinds of stuff. He was before that. He was in OTO. He was with Jack Parsons, the rocket scientist guy.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to conjure scarlet women and all that sort of stuff.
That was an interesting crowd of people there.
Yeah, well, that was very interesting, and who knows, how many of the sort of paperclip Nazi scientists who were brought in. Were sort of contributing to that, and I know there's a lot of Crowleyites who really feel like they get a bad rap. I'm not going to claim to be an expert, but there are certainly people who do dark things with that kind of material, and I know the Nazis would have to come under that. They had a lot of occult beliefs. I'm sure you guys know all about that kind of stuff, probably more than I do. But in any event, Hubbard then later claimed he had been working as an intelligence agent to go undercover and bust up this Crowleyite black magic ring.
Yeah,
so,
I'm sure that was it.
And the connection with
sure
SRI.
That was it, right? So, but he was learning what he was doing, and his son, of course, came along and said, Scientology is just black magic drawn out over a much longer period of time.
But with an element of intelligence gathering with the audits, whereby people reveal their
the question is,
stuff.
are they, were they from the beginning somehow working with intelligence, or is it the case that they took off and intelligence would like, certainly any organization, even a straight-up legit religion or political organization that has that many members who are that disciplined, let's say, then political forces are going to want to get close to them. They're going to want to, kind of get in bed with them in various ways. But then you talk about the way they've penetrated the entertainment industry in a major way. And then also it was kind of bizarre for a while. Hubbard and the main folks were not on land. They were based on a boat, and they were traveling all over the place. And a lot of countries kept kicking them out because they thought they were spies. And it occurred to me that might be the simplest explanation, that they were, in fact, they could have been spies or couriers, or who knows, because they were on the high seas most of the time.
Well,
but I have no evidence of that.
Cults are very convenient covers for all sorts of activities. That's why a lot of times you see cult leaders traveling all over the place. Internationally, it can all be explained as being a missionary travel. But actually,
sure can.
It's a
and
perfect
actually, some Christian groups have been too. Missionary groups have been utilized that way for spy and for CIA cover, and that's a great way to get genuine missionaries who feel like they're doing some important work killed. I mean, that's just same thing as posing as journalists. That's just should never be allowed.
And it's the perfect environment where you would expect to find mind control.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. What is Church of Scientology just about the Church of Scientology, or does it have larger connections? And I'm seeing more and more than it does. And we were talking about SRI, and the two main researchers on the whole remote viewing were high-level Scientologists, acknowledged by everyone. That's not some kind of secret. And then when Uri Geller was brought in and tested, and his story was promoted, that was done at SRI. So the myth of Uri Geller, without getting into whatever reality there might have been, and we know he's been caught cheating, at least some, that also was sort of promoted. And if you think about it, Scientology's whole point of view is if you go through our program, you will develop these powers too. And so first we need to all be open to the idea that we can be trained in these powers, and then you can go off and become a Scientologist, or some of these other remote viewers have started their own stuff. They were allegedly, and seems to be, using what Scientologists call their technology, for the remote viewing program. They brought in Ingo Swann, who was a Scientologist. But here's where it gets weird, because some of the stuff Ingo Swann has written on his own, if remote viewing works, I think it stopped working with him. He was seeing, he's got one book where he was seeing remote viewing naked aliens on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
On the dark side of the moon,
Yeah.
nonetheless.
That
no
book,
less,
that book is called Penetration.
Yeah, you have to wonder
Yeah.
if they're really seeing something, or if there's hallucinations happening.
Or if they're tapping into the collective unconscious, where there's things that are real reflections of the real world, but that are also less substantial.
You there?
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. It sounded like it. Well, there's other possibilities, too. There's the idea these guys weren't remote viewing, but they were just being hypnotized and being thought that they were. There's the idea that this whole thing was just disinformation to get out to the Soviet Union, so they'd start wasting a bunch of money or start worrying about, oh, we can't keep our secrets safe now. There's the possibility that it really worked. That information is sort of self-reported, so if it was meant to be disinformation, of course, the information they're putting out there would be tainted in that way. But in any event, you combine that with the fact that SRI also put out changing images of man, and it's clear they had a whole sort of perspective they wanted to put out, and one that really plays in well to the whole Church of Scientology sort of mythos. And they never said join Scientology. They did quote Hubbard a couple of times, but it really plays into that. So I started looking at, well, how does this all come together? And it turns out the SRI people were also some of the ones who first started putting out the whole Mars-Egypt connection. It's not just that there's anomalies on Mars, but look, don't they look like Egypt? And the people who got that initially, so Whitley Strieber, who got him into that whole perspective, I believe it was, what's his name? Anyway, he was at SRI when he gave that to Strieber. So it all sort of ties together rather nicely. What that agenda is, I'm not completely sure, but one of my ideas was let's promote a sort of an approach where people are very busy working on their own inner lives and very much not worrying about the outer life. The outer world, things are just as they are meant to be, and there's nothing we can do about that, but let's work on our inner lives only. And that would obviously serve the power structure pretty well.
It sure would. That was believed to be the motivation behind the CIA's involvement with the counterculture in the 60s, that you had this anti-war movement happening at that time, a wide awakening on mostly university campuses all over the nation, and suddenly the counterculture becomes diverted along lines of mysticism and so forth, and the CIA, it's been pretty well proven, was manufacturing and distributing LSD during the 60s. And it helped to divert the movement away from, the more external world things, as you say, into staring at your navel.
Yeah,
I want to interject here. It's 7:45 about, and you are listening to PsiOp Radio live from Austin, Texas, via Anomaly Radio and also the Revere Radio Network. And our guest tonight in the first hour here is Ty Brown of DreamsEndWeb.com, where you can find a lot of really great parapolitical and paranormal posts on the subjects that are being discussed here and now. And Ty is giving us kind of the up-to-speed background on how he came to be doing his recent investigation and writing on the activism against the cult of Scientology, going back all the way to California in the 60s and the Stanford Research Institute. So sorry for interjecting there.
Now, you were mentioning the counterculture. Interesting, because Theresa Duncan, again, this sort of strange web of meaning that comes out of her blog page, which is fascinating, because if you read it closely, you get a real education from sort of that time period, more like early 70s. Music, for some reason that was just something she wrote about a lot, but she wrote about Charles Manson several times. She talked about white ops, which I have borrowed from her now, meaning white operations as opposed to black ops, as a CIA secret operation to go do something bad somewhere would be a black op. She specifically gave Charles Manson as an example of a black op, and she had this, whether it was just tongue-in-cheek or whatever, she had this idea that her little secret group, even if it was a secret group only in her mind, were carrying out white ops. And what's interesting about that is, of course, Charles Manson was got a lot of Scientology training. It was in jail. It was not at a Scientology center. When he got out of jail, they evidently did not claim him. He did not end up hanging out in one of their, and I can't see Charles Manson hanging out with these people. They're actually rather humorless. And if you see some of these folks, there's no spontaneity to them. They really are rather robotic. If you watch David Savage, and if you see some of his speeches on the internet and some of these leaked videos, it's very robotic and not inspiring at all. But in any event, he went through a lot of training, and Scientology does have programs in the jails, like a lot of religious groups do. And he came out, and he didn't really seem to hook up with them. There does seem to be evidence that he hooked up with a spin-off of Scientology called The Process, and you could spend the whole 2 hours on The Process.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want to get fully into that because I'm not an expert on it yet, especially since it's the kind of thing where well-meaning conservative or evangelical Christians will look at stuff like that. They'll see satanic plot, and they will just start leapfrogging over details and making claims that the evidence doesn't really support. But what I do know is they were a spinoff, and they started like in '67, and like by '68, they had representation in 5 or 6 U.S. cities, and they started in England. The other thing that's interesting is that Bruce Davis, who was kind of Charles Manson's second in command, went to England twice, and he was working at the Scientology Center. They have an international headquarters. It was in England. At the same time, he was also interacting with the process there. Meanwhile, Whitley Strieber in 1968 admits to at least one visit to the Process Church when he was in England at the same time. I have no idea what that means, but it's interesting. And one theory, and I think the LAPD may have even said this. I'm relying on Ed Sanders' book called The Family, and he does not actually document what he says. A lot of it's in interviews, and you can tell it's via interviews, but you can't always tell where he's getting his information. And he suggested that, I think he was the one who suggested Bruce Davis was actually trying to repair the rift between the Process and Scientology. But whatever the case, some of the stuff they do must work in terms of helping you to control other people, because people claim that Charles Manson used some of those techniques. One that I think of that just is kind of creepy, and I was just watching a former Scientologist talk about it. No, it was a woman who went in with a hidden camera, actually. You sit across from one of their trainers or whatever they're called and just stare in their eyes for an hour and a half. You're not allowed to look away at all, and you start hallucinating, and you can see Charles Manson doing that with somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, you can really see that approach. So, and meanwhile, Charles Manson, of course, is not what he seems. He helped tarnish the counterculture. In fact, he was not of it. He couldn't stand hippies, and was more likely, in my view, to be kind of hooked up in the sort of mob underworld drug dealing sort of world. And I think a lot of the killings might have been contract killings and drug related, and not been random at all.
Yeah, there's been suggestions that somebody burned somebody on a drug deal, and that was the possible cause of the. Well,
there was the La Bianca owed a bunch of money, gambling debts, and then the Tates were hooked into, and Sharon Tate. It wasn't really him. It was Roman Polanski. Was just the whole little. Actually, it wasn't him either. It was a friend of Tate's, and I'm forgetting the name. But he was definitely a drug dealer. And I know you can go on YouTube and see Charles Manson, an old interview with Charles Manson by Geraldo Rivera, who's an idiot. And Charles Manson twice mentions the little black book that he was supposed to retrieve. And, of course, the correct question for a real investigative journalist would be, well, what was in that little black book? What's that about? Who are you working for? He didn't ask that, but that's the general idea, is it was for a monster, and he was not just some random.
And they had some pretty wild parties at the Polanski Tate residence.
With rumors of tapes of those parties, and those tapes, the videos
Hollywood stars doing a porno.
So what it seems like to me is that this world I didn't pay attention to, which is celebrity culture. I think a lot of these celebrities are really under various people's control. The most effective form of mind control, I think, in the celebrity culture is just flat-out heroin and other kinds of drugs. You get them hooked, and then you've got them. These parties where videotapes are made, Charles Manson, Sanders kind of overlooks it.